Welcome back, folks, to the Fantasy Slant powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. I'm your host, Jeff Ratcliffe, back for another one. It's the preseason. We're officially into it. The Hall of Fame game is in the rearview mirror, and we're looking at a full slate of games tonight. That means fantasy drafts are coming. They're coming hard. They're coming heavy. That sounded dirty, but we have a lot to get through, and we're going to get you prepped every step of the way. If you haven't gone to the website yet, go and check it out. The new and improved Pro Football Focus, all kinds of cool stuff, and you got the 3 tabs now, which is awesome. You got a Pro tab, you got a College tab, you got a Fantasy tab, and you can't beat it. The information you're getting there is second to none. And sign up for that Fantasy Gold product, $29.99, gets you everything you need: content, tools, data, rankings, everything, including a draft guide, which is going to be updated in about 2 weeks, too, fully updated for your draft. So head on over there. I'm not going to do any more commercials, though. We're going to get right into this. We have a full slate ahead of us, not just the games this evening, but a preview today of the NFC, all of the NFC, 16 teams. But really the most pressing issues, we're not going to tell you that Eli Manning is starting at quarterback for the Giants. You know that, but there are some pressing issues on each one of the teams that we do need to be ahead of the curve on if we want to win our fantasy league. So with me today, just like last week, you met them last week, the 2 newest lead writers. We have Mike Tagliere, we have Kevin Cole. Guys, I know everybody likes to do those little cutesy little intros where we talk about something in our lives. We're not doing that today. We're going to get right into the action. We're talking some football, and we're going to start in the NFC East, the Dallas Cowboys. And, obviously we know the scenario. We know DeMarco Murray is out of the mix. We've talked about Joseph Randle and Darren McFadden ad nauseum. And we know that right now Joseph Randle is the guy who you would probably want on your fantasy team if you had to choose one of those 2 guys. I want to go in a different direction, though. I want to look at the tight end position. And, Mike, Jason Witten, is he getting enough love right now? Let's think about what this guy has done in the course of his career. Since 2004, there's only been one season where he's finished outside of the top 10 tight ends in fantasy scoring. That was in 2006, and he finished 11th, okay? And yet this guy seems to be dropping, you're able to get him in the 10th round, 11th round, 12th round. I mean, is he over the hill? Am I crazy for liking this guy? What do you think?
No, I think it gets to a point with the tight end where you have to wonder where that production starts to decline. And Jason Witten, he never relied on speed or anything like that. Yeah, he's getting older, but he never relied on that. He relied on his route running. Des Bryant's going to take away attention. Cole Beasley, obviously doing the slot thing. But Jason Witten, he's not being... I think in your average public league, he's a big name. I think he's going to go like the ADP of MFL 10s and things like that. Those are going to be a little bit different than, say, your amateur league. So I do think Jason Witten's still going to be drafted inside the top 10. And me personally, I'm kind of leaning away from him as top 10. I just don't think he offers the upside that I'd like at that position, especially if I'm going to be passing on the top 4 or 5 tight ends. I'm going to wait and play that tight end like those Tyler Eiferts or the Kyle Rudolphs of the world. I think that Witten's kind of stuck in that middle territory where he's a safe option but doesn't offer too much upside. I just think that I'd rather get out a year too early than a year too late.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. And by the way, that's my dog Lucy making her first appearance on the show today. She's all in on Witten. But anyway, you'll probably hear her about 8 times through the course of the show. But Witten it's interesting. We look at that ADP. And you're right, when you're talking about a home league versus an industry league, things are going to be different. Quarterbacks are going to go earlier. There's probably a good chance tight ends are going to go earlier. And Witten is going a bit earlier, but he's still going as that 10th tight end off the board. And when you look at some of these guys, I understand why Owen Daniels, some people are really liking him and he's going ahead of Witten, but I'd much rather Witten. We don't know what Owen Daniels is in that offense. Jordan Cameron, ceiling, of course, but floor, I'd rather have Witten's floor there. So it is a pretty interesting scenario, and it just proves that story that you can wait at tight end this year and have no problems getting somebody who's going to be more than serviceable on your fantasy roster. And that guy could be on the New York Giants, Larry Donnell, dealing with a little bit of an injury issue. And guys, of course, we talked about last week, we talked about the running back situation, so we're not going to rehash that. Kevin, I want to talk about the wide receiver situation. And we know Odell Beckham Jr. is there. And Kevin, you got your finger on the pulse in New York, by the way. But we know Odell Beckham Jr. is there. No question there, top 10 wide receiver with what he did, historic run last season. But I'm curious about this number 2 situation. You know, we have Victor Cruz coming back from a really tough injury. We have Ruben Randle, who was heavily targeted last year, and actually surprisingly good if you go back and look at some of the numbers, especially towards the end of the season. But I'm kind of curious your thoughts of, you know, can we sustain this many wide receivers? Is Cruz, you know, is he overvalued at the 29th wide receiver off the board right now? I mean, what are your thoughts about those guys beyond Odell Beckham Jr.?
Yeah, I think Cruz might be a little bit overvalued, although the early word is that he's performing a little bit better than you'd expect. I mean, it's a very devastating injury that he had, and you're starting to see him move on the boards a little bit as you're getting some positive news, and what you haven't seen is it really affect the ADPs of the others. Now, you mentioned Ruben Randle. He's heavily targeted. He was in his 3rd year last year. He was a very young prospect coming out, so maybe you could discount that a little bit, how long he's been in the league. But he wasn't very good for most of the season, and then when he did put up some big games at the end of the year, I think it's safe to say that if you drafted Ruben Randle early in your drafts, you were either out of the playoffs or you had, you know, kind of cursed him by that point. So I think it's going to be an interesting situation, but one of the things that with Cruz starting to look like he's rounding back is I think Odell Beckham Jr. becomes a little bit riskier just because he was getting really crazy volume at the end of last year. The Giants were passing a lot, and they were just feeding him the ball. If Cruz can siphon off some of those targets, it might end up being a situation where you don't really know each week who's going to end up scoring, and there might not be one guy that you can really point to as the man there, and that could just end up being for a poor situation. But then again, if you're looking at Eli Manning, that could end up benefiting him having all those different receiving options.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, there's going to be a breaking point for every single receiver, and I do think Cruz is overvalued at 29. But later on in drafts, I mean, just today I was in a mock draft, a 10-team league, but I was able to get Cruz as the number 14, in the 14th round, not the number 14. The dog is really distracting me, guys. As the number 14, no, not the number 14. As the 14 in the 14th round, I got Cruz. And, you know, I'm going to take that value all day long and not have a problem with that whatsoever. Even coming off of that particular injury, I'm still happy with it. So moving on, coming off an injury as well in Philadelphia.
Real quick, if I could, go ahead, sorry. I was hoping to chime in real quick before we move to the next subject. I just wanted to touch on the fact that I was looking at the Giants today, actually, and Odell Beckham had 63 targets in his last 4 games. That's a pace of 252 for the year. So while a lot of people are loving Beckham, those targets are not all going to go there. You can't continue that pace. Cruz is coming back. Randall's coming back. Randall, 58th receiver off the board, definitely worth a flyer. But I just wanted to throw that in there. That pace is it's ridiculous. You can't keep that pace that Odell Beckham had at the end of the season.
But it is weird, though, that he was getting double coverage. He was getting more coverage and putting up better numbers. So can you? I mean, that's the question. I've heard some people, including my buddy Chris Wessling, compare Odell Beckham Jr. to Michael Jordan. And I know that's not, like, you know, it's a weird comparison, but Michael Jordan was a superstar, and that's sort of the idea, doing things that nobody was doing at that time. And we are seeing a transformation in the wide receiver position. Stranger things have happened, but I do agree, though, that we may see that volume come down a little bit, but what Odell Beckham Jr. can do is just, it's freakishly good. The other question we have to ask is, how sustainable is it for 3 wide receivers? You know, right. We don't see 3 wide receivers put up viable fantasy numbers, you know, in really any situation. So, you know, keep that in mind, folks who are going out and drafting Devontae Adams and Cody Latimer and guys like that. You're going to need some help. You're going to need an injury or something to that effect to really make those guys viable weekly options with consistent fantasy floors. But anyway, the dog stopped barking, and we're in Philadelphia here, so we might as well talk about Philadelphia. We have an injury situation, as I was alluding to, Sam Bradford coming off an injury, that is. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of concern. When you have a guy who tears an ACL 2 years in a row, yeah, that's a big red flag. But we've seen in this Chip Kelly offense that there has been incredible production out of really lackluster quarterbacks, Nick Foles and Mark Sanchez. So the question is, you know, is Sam Bradford, Mike, is he undervalued right now? A lot of people have him as a mid-pack QB2. somewhere around the 16th, 17th quarterback in rankings, which is really where he's going in ADP. Is that undervalued, or do you think the market is fair on him?
I think he's undervalued a little bit. I think what's built into his ADP is his injury history. Obviously, the guy, I think he's underrated as a quarterback as a whole, though, because I've been aboard the Sam Bradford, bandwagon for a long time since he was drafted. I really did think the kid had top 5 potential in the league. Now, people also undervalue the fact that when you're passed on from offensive coordinator to offensive coordinator like Sam Bradford has, it's really tough to learn an offense. Like, you look at the greats, Sean Payton with Drew Brees, you look at Mike McCarthy with Aaron Rodgers. These guys, they've worked in the offensive systems, they perfected them. Now, Mark Sanchez, Nick Foles, it didn't matter who they threw in Chip Kelly's system, they put up points. It's a heavily they have the most snaps, obviously, in the NFL, and Sam Bradford's going to see the benefits of those. He's also got better receivers than he's ever had. I mean, when we're talking about Sam Bradford, the odds have been against him, yet over his career, he's got 60 touchdowns compared to just 38 interceptions. The guy is better than people give him credit for. I really do hope he sticks in Philly. I don't know if Chip Kelly's going to be around as long as, some people might think he is, but I do hope Sam Bradford hangs around for a long time. So I do want to see people understand that this kid is talented, and he just might get a shot in Philly now.
Yeah, and let's not forget, too, that he played a very similar system in college. That was something that people talked about when the Bradford news originally went down, the whole trade news went down with Foles and Bradford. He played in the system in college. This is not a brand new concept for him to be in a system like this. So he is a very good fit. Would it shock me if this guy puts up top 10? Absolutely not. And I wouldn't even be blown away if this guy puts up top 5 fantasy numbers. Now, I'm not predicting that by any means, but it's certainly within the realm of possibility, especially because of the pace that you refer to in that particular offense. Now, I want to stick with the quarterback theme, Kevin, and now move into the Washington Redskins. You know who I'm going to bring up, RG3, obviously also coming off an injury, and we keep hearing, more and more news about this guy, and half of it doesn't have to do with football, but the big storyline is the narrative. He's lost confidence. We have a coach as well who isn't sure about his quarterback, and that's usually never a recipe for success. But RG3 has shown in the past, obviously in his first season, that he can be an elite-level fantasy quarterback, and he still does have that athletic upside. In that game last year where he got hurt against Jacksonville, he was on pace to have a really big game. Now, granted, it was Jacksonville, but still, is there value to be had here? You're in a deeper league, Kevin, maybe a 2-quarterback format. Do you take a flyer on Griffin, or are you just dodging this guy altogether?
I've kind of ambivalent on him right now. Like you mentioned, he had the great first year, but I think you saw that with quite a few of these read option quarterbacks, that they started off playing very well, they ran a lot, it boosted their passing efficiency, and then things kind of trailed down through the years. And of course, he has the additional concerns from the injuries, and he looked so out of sorts last year coming into a new system. It sounded like when Shanahan was there in the past, they really tried to install everything to make him feel comfortable and be similar to his system back in Baylor. So, he's really of little cost, but the quarterback position is so deep this year that you have guys going late who you might not like a whole lot, but guys like Alex Smith, who I think was a QB 13 a couple of years ago, he could bounce back this year with some new weapons and maybe some better pace there. You have Andy Dalton, who was a top 5 QB a few years ago, and now hopefully he's got some healthy options. They're talking about opening up the offense there. You just have a lot of options that you can go for this year, so I'm probably not going to be drafting him a lot. And I think he's just going to be one of those quarterbacks where every year you could point to his ceiling being that rookie year ceiling, but he's probably never going to get back there again. It's just tough seeing him do that because he's not big enough to sustain the punishment that comes with the running game, and the running game is what seemed to really open everything up for him. Yeah, that's a good point. It is tough, and when you look at some of these players who are going in the similar area, I just pulled up the ADP. You got guys as well like Joe Flacco potentially to take a flyer on. Big arm, and hey, Trestman's offense loves targeting wide receivers in the end zone. Just look at what they did in Chicago over the last a couple seasons with Brandon Marshall, Alshon Jeffrey. And actually, I'd like to talk about the Bears next. Speaking of a wide receiver in Chicago, but this time I'd like to talk about the rookie wide receiver, Mike. We have Kevin White, and we know the draft pedigree's there. 4.35 in the combine, big,
but raw, not necessarily the polished receiver that Amari Cooper is. Amari Cooper's super polished, silky smooth. Kevin White, raw, but high ceiling, athletically off the charts. And yet, mysterious shin injury keeps him sidelined for the last month and a half. And now, he's sitting buried on the depth chart where he should have been easily ahead of Eddie Royal, easily ahead of Marcus Wilson. He's behind these guys. So, the question is, ultimately, do we have value here? Because let's not forget, we saw a similar scenario last year as well with the aforementioned Odell Beckham. People drafted him late, and then dropped him because he really wasn't playing in the beginning of the season. And then, boom, we saw what happens. Now, I'm not saying is White and Odell Beckham for this year, but is there value to be had with White, in your opinion, Mike?
Well, that's the thing. I'm from Chicago, and when the Bears made the pick of Kevin White, I felt like there were some other needs they had. However, he kind of fell into their lap, and it turned out to be, it was a good pick, in my opinion. Now, the thing is, he is raw. He doesn't have a huge route tree right now. He came from a junior college. He worked for everything he got. So I do believe in Kevin White, but the fact that he's being drafted this year in front of some guys like Brandon LaFell just blows my mind. He hasn't practiced one bit with the team. They're saying he's not going to play in any preseason games, and I understand the Odell Beckham comparisons, but guys, that's a one-off situation. He's going to be coming in behind Eddie Royal, behind Alshon Jeffrey, and as we know with Jay Cutler, he heavily targets one receiver, and he's not going to walk in and do that, especially under John Fox. It's a new offensive system. The entire team is learning a new offensive system with Adam Gase there. It's just a situation I'm staying away from. With his ADP where it is, I mean, if you're able to grab him, in the last 3 rounds or something like that, like Beckham, you were able to grab him off the waiver wire in some public leagues just because people had given up on him. It took a few weeks for him to get back into things. But, yeah, no, Kevin White I'm staying away from. There's just no chance I'm paying his price right now, given we have no idea when he's going to return, and when he does, he's buried on the depth chart.
Yeah, Alshon Jeffrey going to play that Demaryius Thomas role in the Adam Gase offense. That means a lot of targets, especially with Jay Cutler. He locks into guys. Martellus Bennett last year as well saw plenty of targets. So it's tough. It's one of those. He's one of those players. Yes, he's overvalued right now in terms of his draft stock. But watch everything plummet. Try to trade for him in dynasty leagues when it does, and then watch it come right back up again in November. Wouldn't be shocked if we see Kevin White go on a little bit of a run towards the end of the season when he finally gets into the mix. Before the show, actually, we were just chit-chatting briefly, and I was in that mock that I mentioned earlier. I ended up getting Amir Abdullah in the 8th round in a 10-team league, maybe a round or so later than he should have went, but pretty good value. But the guy's getting lots of buzz, Kevin. And, I guess the question is, where are we at in terms of perception, in terms of reality? What are your thoughts on Amir Abdullah, and maybe even your thoughts on Joique Bell, that running back situation in Detroit?
Yeah, I think it's a great backfield, especially if you're in a PPR league. They throw the ball to the running backs a lot. I think they were either the 3rd or 4th highest scoring backfield last year in a PPR league. So if you can get him after, let's say, the top 30 wide receivers are off the board, somewhere in that sort of range, especially in PPR, then I like him. Unfortunately, he just hasn't been going there very often. So I feel like you could probably target some other guys that are starting to fall with poor preseason buzz, like a Tevin Coleman or someone like that, who's falling further down, but maybe has just as much opportunity. So I wouldn't draft Joique Bell just because his floor is probably extremely low. He's had a lot of injury problems. He's getting older. Not only do you have Abdullah there, but you also have Riddick, who looked pretty good last year in limited action. In fact, Riddick is a guy that I really like as a late pick, just because you're giving yourself 2 opportunities to maybe fill in, because if either Bell or Abdullah goes down, or if one of them underperform, that's an offense that can support 2 running backs. So I think Riddick is a guy that you could throw a dart at the end of the round and then get a few running back 1 performances out of him in a PPR league. It's kind of similar to Kyrie Robinson and the Saints backfield. So right now I would probably stay away from all of them, other than Riddick late, or Abdullah if he falls into the type of range that you were able to get him at.
And then we're going to see Zach Zenner's stock go through the roof after the first preseason game. I'm going to get this up before these games, because we did that last year where we would put shows up. We would record a show on Thursday, and a lot of people wouldn't listen to it until Friday, and then half our predictions were wrong. But anyway, these are the breaks. But moving on to Green Bay, hey, it's straightforward in Green Bay. We know Aaron Rodgers. We know Eddie Lacy. We know Randall Cobb and Jordy Nelson. We get that. I just told you a little bit about Devontae Adams. So that's all straightforward. But, Mike, the tight end position is a little interesting. You know, we have Richard Rodgers and Andrew Corliss there. Corliss, you know, more of maybe the blocker. Rodgers, potentially a receiving target. And, you know, as I said earlier, you can really wait at tight end, and you can potentially stream tight end. So I just was curious of your thoughts on Richard Rodgers because, hey, we've seen it in the past in Green Bay. We've seen and I still have nightmares or whatever. He haunts my dreams, Jermichael Finley. You know, what could have been with Jermichael Finley, all my dynasty teams where I had to cut him. It still hurts. But Richard Rodgers, not your Michael Finley level of talent, but in a very good situation, no?
He is in a really good situation, and he was interesting to me last year, so I kept an eye on him. Like I said, from Chicago, so I see a lot of Packers games. I'm able to watch him closely, and I'm a huge Aaron Rodgers fan. That being said, Richard Rodgers, I was told he lost some weight this offseason, which helps. Andrew Corliss, I'm pretty sure he's going to get suspended at some point, is he not? So Rodgers is going to get a shot. I do believe he'll get a shot, but there's just too many options there. I will tell you, I know you talked about Devontae Adams and people drafting him. He is being drafted a little high. I could see like a James Jones type season out of that guy. I really can. I could see, you know, Randall Cobb's touchdowns coming down and Devontae Adams stepping in there. I just don't think you could support 2.5 receivers, we'll call it, and then a top flight tight end. I'd rather take the upside of like a Kyle Rudolph or like a Vernon Davis. Vernon Davis, yes. Love him this year.
It was there was an arrest for Corliss. I don't know. You know, the NFL typically likes to let the law play out first, so it could be something that won't impact him until next season. But Rodgers is the guy certainly there, and you know, I'm certainly not saying that he's a top 10 option or anything like that. Not even a top really 25 option. But for those of you who do like to stream, it's really, you know, you have to keep your eye on these players and the matchups, because there are certain teams who don't fare well against the tight end. They don't have maybe that safety who can cover the tight end very well, or linebacker who can cover the tight end very well. So, you know, it's something to sort of key in there, especially if it's a team like that who also has good corners. That's a, you know, matchup plus for tight ends, and that could be a DFS thing as well. Something to key in there. So finishing out the NFC North here, we have the Minnesota Vikings. We know there's Teddy Bridgewater hype. Obviously, Adrian Peterson back in the mix. One of those streamable tight ends as well, and Kyle Rudolph. But really, Kevin, the place that I'm most interested in is the wide receiver position. And we know, okay, is Cordell Patterson ever going to learn the route tree? Who knows? But we know that right now, implanted as the top two receivers, we have Mike Wallace, we have Charles Johnson, and I've been on record numerous times that I just don't get it with Charles Johnson. I don't see what people are seeing. He's only had one game with over 100 yards, and even in that week, he finished outside of the top 10 wide receivers in fantasy scoring. What is everybody seeing here? I don't know. Kevin, do you disagree with me? Are you seeing something I'm not? And if you are, what are you seeing?
Yeah, Charles Johnson's an interesting guy because, you know, he was somebody that I actually kept an eye on when he was working his way through the practice squads on some other teams. He was in Green Bay for a while. He tore his ACL. He went over to the Cleveland Browns, and they released him, which is kind of shocking when you think about the wide receiver talent that they've had over the last couple of years. And then he made his way to Minnesota, and I think he had a rapport with Bridgewater. I think he was a safe option. He has some great measurables, but he obviously isn't a tremendously talented receiver. You have Mike Wallace coming there. I'm just interested to see how they're going to incorporate both of those guys because they're both going in recent drafts that I've seen in the 30s, let's say wide receiver 30 sort of range. I'm not sure that both of them are going to be able to live up to that this year. I just don't see that offense with Adrian Peterson hopefully getting a healthy amount of touches. They utilize the tight end a lot there. I'm just interested to see what's going to happen. I don't know if either one of them is going to pay off. I think Wallace is intriguing because this is really a make or break for him to figure out whether it was Ryan Tannehill or if it was Mike Wallace and who was the issue there. So I think I'd rather take a shot at Wallace to see what happens there. And he's got the enormous contract, right? So they did trade for him. They're eating that contract, so they're going to want to try and feed him the ball somewhat. I know that Charles Johnson was a little bit of a security blanket underneath, but I think I'd take a shot at Wallace if anybody in that wide receiver core.
Yeah, I do actually agree with that. Teddy has a nice deep ball, and he's one of the better quarterbacks under pressure, at least based on last year's data. So, intriguing situation there, and of course, intriguing situations always in daily fantasy. And you could possibly start the season off by winning $2 million in Week 1 at DraftKings.com, America's favorite one-week fantasy football site. $2 million. That's crazy. It's the biggest fantasy football contest ever. $10 million in prizes being given out, including $2 million for first and $1 million for second place. Where do you get $1 million for second place? It's amazing. So 1 week means no season-long commitments. It's fantasy football on demand. Play where you want, when you want, and with the players you want. You just pick your players, pile up the points, and pick up your cash. It's as simple as that. You can get started playing right now. You're preparing for the regular season, so you might as well get set and play some preseason while you're doing so. You've already been scouting all those players. Put that knowledge to the test this football season at DraftKings.com. Hurry up right now. Go over to DraftKings.com. Use the promo code PFF to play for free at your shot at $2 million. I don't want to say $1 million. You can get $1 million for second. 1 week millionaire maker. Enter for free right now. That promo code again is PFF, and of course that's DraftKings.com. So let's move right along. Now we're in the South, and we are in Hotlanta. Of course, again, some things are pretty straightforward here. We do know Matty Ice is back there. Matt Ryan is there. Top 10 quarterback toward the tail end of the top 10s. We know, of course, that Julio Jones is there, and the steady but sometimes injured Roddy White, and going for a pretty good value. But my concern, Mike, is the running backs. Devontae Freeman, coming out of Florida State last year, an exciting player, on the smaller side, but can scoot, right, and good receiving skills out of the backfield. Then we have Tevin Coleman in the draft this year. Tevin Coleman, over half of his yards in college last season came on runs of over 15 yards. I mean, this guy is a home run hitter. We've seen how running backs can do in the Shanahan system, but they both are banged up with hammies right now. So, Mike, what are you doing with these two guys? Who do you think emerges, or is it going to be a full RBBC all season long?
I'm in a weird spot with these two. I was in the Flex League, actually, this past weekend, and I actually took Devonta Freeman as one of my flex players. I was in a weird spot where at the end of the first round, I was drafting in the 12th spot, so I had to reach a little bit for a running back. He was the next one in the area. He's in that, that no man's land, that 32 to 40 area, where any of those guys can really take the leap up to RB2 status. So him and Tevin Coleman, I do believe that Devonta Freeman's going to start as the starter there in more of like a 60-40 split. And it's going to eventually move towards Coleman. I actually do believe Coleman will eventually take it. I just think he has more of the size, whereas Freeman can take over that Roy Halou role in the offense. I think that's more his role than a workhorse. So I don't believe too much in Devonta Freeman right now, unfortunately, even though I nabbed him there. Everybody was waiting on him, and I just snagged him. It's just not a pick that I felt great about. I don't think anybody can feel great about taking either of those backs right now. I think as it shakes out, you'll start to see the value. But right now, it's really tough. But neither of them are very high in ADP, so you could take a flyer on either one of them.
Yeah, definitely chucking a dart and hoping you hit, because there is the potential with that offense, and especially with that offensive coordinator, for some good fantasy value. Moving on to Carolina. We're going to Carolina, and again, some straightforward stuff here, but I think the biggest question, Kevin, is at running back. Not question of who the running back is going to be. We know it's going to be Jonathan Stewart, but the question, well, I guess first and foremost, can he stay healthy? We don't know that. The crystal ball, that approach never works, and I'm not in this to predict injuries. So the question ultimately is, where are you valuing Jonathan Stewart? Because we've seen glimpses of, really RB1 production out of him at times. But where are you valuing Jonathan Stewart going into this season?
I think I have him a little bit higher than maybe what his current value is. He's a guy that you're seeing go in the range of maybe RB20-ish sort of range, maybe a little bit later than that. I think that's a fair range. I mean, he's really a very interesting pick because, he was extremely highly touted coming out of college. He's performed well when he's been on the field. He hasn't been on the field a lot. He has all of the attributes that you'd like to see from a workhorse. So he's somebody who could jump up into that range. But then again, it's just tough when you're betting on a guy who hasn't ever produced that all year long. But if you look at guys who can jump up into that top tier, they're normally guys who are going to be heavily utilized, and that normally means it's a situation where the rest of their backfield mates aren't getting any action at all, and that could be something that happens here. I mean, if you look what happened with Le'Veon Bell last year, LeGarrette Blount was basically phased out of the game. DeMarco Murray, no one else really came in. So this is a situation where they could just ride Stewart until the wheels fall off, whether you can sustain that or not. So I think he has a lot more upside than running backs that are in that range. It just depends on whether or not you're comfortable paying that price for someone who hasn't been able to put up sustained production over an entire season for many years in the NFL.
Yeah, it's been very, very frustrating with Stewart, but you bring up a good point. That depth chart is extremely thin. Behind him, Cameron Artis-Payne, a rookie out of Auburn. A player who has a nose for the end zone for sure, 13 scores last season, but, he's not really a high pedigree type player. So this is a really great opportunity for Stewart. And, yeah, if he's going after 20 running backs go off the board, and he stays healthy, that's a huge value right there. He could easily be a top 15 running back this season. Moving to New Orleans, and New Orleans, in New Orleans, we've seen a big transition. We've seen changes, especially at the wide receiver position, where this year, Marcus Colston, sure, he's still there, but Brandon Cooks, hopefully healthy, in the mix. And then the number 3 receiver. So, Mike, we're hearing some stuff here. We're hearing Tune. We're hearing Coleman. Are you willing to take a shot on either of these guys, and how early are you drafting Brandon Cooks?
Yes, I'm willing to take a shot on either of Nick Tune or Brandon Coleman, and there's not too many things that happen in preseason that I'm just really, really waiting to watch, but this is one of them. Now, Sean Payton had a vote of confidence towards Nick Tune. Nick Tune's been there for a couple of years already, so I do believe he has a leg up in the competition. But Brandon Coleman, they're saying that he's looking really good in camp, and he's a big 6'6" guy. Nick Tune 6'4", so he's none little either. I think that Tune's got a little bit of the Kenny Stills to him, where I believe he could fill that role really well. And that's right, as of right now, Nick Tune would be the guy that I think would take over that number 3 spot. With Colston aging and Brandon Cooks, I'm so glad you brought that up. His ADP is up to number 13 receiver off the board, which is just, it's madness, in my opinion. I understand he's got the upside there, but I think if he lives up to everything that you thought the guy could be, he's the wide receiver 13. He's in that gray area right now because he's not a guy that's going to catch a whole lot of touchdowns, but he was kind of like that joker. They'd move all around the field. They could utilize him like that. But then they went out and signed C.J. Spiller. So it kind of took away some of the hype train on Cooks for me. Obviously not for everybody else because his ADP speaks for itself, but Cooks is not somebody that I'm touching in the top 15 receivers, no. But if he fell for some reason to around the 20th receiver, yeah, I'd take him there. But yeah, Tune and Coleman, I'd rather take a flyer on one of those guys than touch Cooks at his ADP where it's at right now.
See, I'm a little different than you. I'm buying in. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid because if he's everything we think he could be, then he's better than Odell Beckham. That's what we were saying last year. This guy is going to be the best rookie wide receiver. So if he really is that, then, I mean, we're getting him at a bargain at the 13th or 14th wide receiver off the board. Lots of targets to go around. Jimmy Graham out of the mix. Kenny Stills out of the mix. And Josh Hill, folks, I'm sorry, he's not Jimmy Graham, and he's not even going to come close to that. He might not even lead the team, the tight ends on the team, in receptions, Ben Watson. So, hey, this could be really interesting. So I'm on the other side, but then again, I mean, that's the way I like to grip and rip at wide receiver and take those young guys with the huge ceilings. So for me, Cooks, but I like what you're saying about the other guys. I do agree with that. I want to take a shot, and in deeper leagues especially, and get my hands on whoever that third wide receiver is. Moving on to Tampa Bay, we have a rookie quarterback in play, and Jameis, of course, the number 1 pick overall, Kevin. Jameis, not a speedy guy, just under that 5-second barrier in the 40. Last season, of course, coming off a tough season in terms of interceptions, 18 picks, 25 touchdowns on the season. Pretty much everybody knew who he was going to throw to on every play. His name was Rashad Green, right? It's going to Rashad. Doesn't matter. You could have 11 guys on him. Going to throw it to Rashad. But this year, he's got some interesting weapons. He's got a full complement. Mike Evans, Vincent Jackson, Austin Seferian-Jenkins, and then whoever really wins that slot receiver job could be Kenny Bell, the rookie, could be Robert Herron, a rookie last year, talented guy who a lot of people aren't really aware of. But either way, the question is with Jameis. And we know about how people feel about him in Dynasty, but what about redraft, Kevin? Is there any value to be had with Jameis this year? I mean, there is some talk that people really expect him to throw over 4,000 yards this year.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's impossible for that to happen. Obviously, the league has been trending, becoming more and more of a pass league. But if you look at rookie quarterbacks, even the guys that are going at the top of the draft, they just don't put up that sort of production. I mean, Peyton Manning had a fairly strong rookie year. There are some others like Jim Kelly who had a decent rookie year. But a lot of the quarterbacks that we've seen explode in their rookie years from a fantasy perspective have done it with their legs, not just their arms. If you think about the guys who've been drafted early and who've done well, I mean, Cam Newton was a sensation as a rookie. We talked about RG3 and Andrew Luck. You know, Andrew Luck, you don't think of him as a running quarterback, but he puts up substantial incremental production every single year through his legs, and that's really what floated him up in his rookie year and made him pretty good. And then Russell Wilson was another guy who wasn't highly drafted, but he performed very well as a rookie, mostly on his legs also. So I just think the ceiling is not going to be as high with Winston as it is with potentially if you're not getting that rushing production, just because it takes quarterbacks a while to acclimate to the NFL, no matter who your weapons are. I mean, this is a team that was awful last year. Let's not forget that. And they had largely the same weapons last year that they have this year. It's not as if they're getting a significant upgrade. I mean, Mike Evans is going to be a little bit older. Seferian-Jenkins was injured, so he can be there a bit. But I just think it's going to take at least a year for Winston, and I would probably look to go. I actually like Marcus Mariota a lot more this year, just because you're going to get that rushing production. So you could potentially get the upside if he comes around from a passing perspective also. Absolutely agree with that. I would much rather have Mariota, and I've often compared, Mariota this year could be a poor man's Russell Wilson in terms of his fantasy profile. So I absolutely agree, but I don't think, it'll be long before Jameis becomes a very fantasy relevant quarterback. It's just going to be tough in year one for him to do that. I wouldn't want to really invest, unless you're one of those crazy late round streamers. Maybe he's a guy you want to look at in certain matchups there, but otherwise, probably steering clear. Heading out west. Now we're going to Arizona. We know Carson Palmer's back. We know Andre Ellington is going to get 5,000 touches, according to Bruce Arians this year. We know David Johnson, the rookie, promising rookie, is there just in case anything happens. But the real issue here is at wide receiver, Mike. If you have to take one of the Arizona wide receivers, who are you taking and why?
I'm taking John Brown. I know that nobody wants to hear that. It would have been Michael Floyd, but I'm backing off on him just because his fingers went through his palm. That's not a good thing when you're a receiver and you rely on that. I know they're saying that he could be back by week 1, week 3, in between that range, but the thing is, how effective is he going to be at that point? I mean, I just can't put my faith behind Michael Floyd. Larry Fitzgerald, past his prime. I'm sorry, guys. I know a lot of people out there are waiting for me to say that Larry Fitzgerald's going to return to wide receiver 2 form. I just don't see it. I don't see it. That he's been trending downward for quite a while. I know his hands are still good, but I think John Brown's the upside play, and if they're both being drafted in that same region, I'll take the guy that's not quarterback reliant. I think that Fitzgerald, I talked about him the other day. He had 8 games last year where he had 34 yards or less. So in other words, he killed your wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 slot, while he didn't offer that upside that someone like John Brown can. Like, they both play with the same quarterbacks. I just believe that John Brown is the upside play. He spent the offseason living with Carson Palmer, so I know some people want to attribute, like, saying Larry Fitzgerald has that connection with Palmer. I think John Brown's going to have the same one, and he's ascending while Larry Fitzgerald is descending. So I'll take the guy that's on his way up, and he's going to have an opportunity in the first couple weeks to make a big impression. I think he does it.
Yeah, and it looks like the fantasy community has caught up with that one, because John Brown is now the first of the Arizona wide receivers off the board in terms of ADP. And almost threw up a little bit with that Michael Floyd.
Yeah.
That one's a little tough to handle, but certainly not tough to handle if you have your hands on Russell Wilson or Marshawn Lynch this year. Got to like those guys. Obviously, continue to produce in that more conservative offense there in Seattle. But when we look across the line, obviously there's going to be one player who really stands out, Kevin, and his name is Jimmy Graham. Not the most ideal place for him to land, and the gap has really increased between Rob Gronkowski and the field now as a result. But I guess the question is, what are your expectations for Jimmy Graham in Seattle? And where are you comfortable? What round are you comfortable in a 12-team league at finally pulling the trigger on Jimmy Graham?
Yeah, Jimmy Graham's one of those guys where obviously you have the upside just because of what he's done in the past, but he's coming from the offense, so it was the heaviest volume offense in the NFL, to one that's the lowest volume offense in the NFL. So it's just going to be really tough. I mean, he's a guy where if you could get him at a discount, I would like it. I mean, you could say that now you're getting him in the third round, so you're getting him a discount to where he was going last year in the first round. But I think the first round was just a little bit out of whack last year. And before that, he was going in the second round, and that's back when he's still coming off a really great season. So you're really only getting maybe a one-round discount and a really enormous downgrade as far as the offense is concerned and what it'll be able to do as far as from a volume perspective. So, I mean, maybe if you slipped into the fourth or fifth round, I really don't see a lot of difference between taking him or taking someone like Travis Kelce, and I rarely see Kelce go above Graham in any draft. So I just don't think I'm going to have any exposure to him this year. He'll catch some touchdowns. I think his largest effect may be actually hurting Marshawn Lynch's production around the goal line a little bit last year. I mean, Lynch had 17 touchdowns last year, including 4 through the air. So I think it could maybe whittle away at some of that production, maybe give some incremental touchdowns to Russell Wilson. But as far as a fantasy play on its own, I mean, maybe if he was going in the 5th round or something, but I don't see him anywhere close to that this year.
Yeah, it's really tough unless you get Gronkowski. It's tough to advocate drafting one of those tight ends early. Even Kelce, for me, is going a little bit too early for my taste. I'd much rather take a player with almost a very similar ceiling in Zach Ertz, but much later on. I'm not saying I put them side by side, but I don't have Ertz that much further behind Kelce in rankings and projections. So, tight end's a really tricky position this year, and it's much better to wait. Now, speaking of tight ends, Mike, I know you like Vernon Davis. We're not going to talk about Vernon Davis in San Francisco, though. I want to talk about the running backs. The running back situation here is pretty interesting. Now, this has always been a run-heavy offense, but we're talking about now losing essentially half of the offensive line, Anthony Davis, Mike Iupati, out of the mix. So what does this do for Carlos Hyde, Reggie Bush? How comfortable are you with those guys this season?
Carlos Hyde, love the talent, hate the situation. Not going to end up with him at any of my fantasy teams just because he's going to be going inside of those top 20 running backs, and there's a few other guys that I'd much rather have in front of him, like who we just talked about, Amir Abdullah. I'd take Abdullah over Hyde right now any day. Carlos Hyde's in a bad spot, guys, and don't draft him. Think that you're drafting a guy that was on the 49ers last year. This is a completely different team. The defense is going to be awful. He's in first and second down back. I know he can catch the ball a little bit. But I think the 49ers are bracing for this. It's the main reason that I feel like Vernon Davis is going to have a comeback season, is that the defense is going to allow so much. This offensive line isn't very much. They're going to need to improvise the offense. I think Colin Kaepernick, I know he ran for like 700 yards last year. I didn't even realize it was that many. But Reggie Bush is going to play a bigger role in this offense than people think. It really wouldn't shock me if he outsnapped Carlos Hyde, just because of how bad I think this team's going to be. I really think it will be a shock to me if the 49ers win more than 4 or 5 games. It's just going to be a different team than most people think.
Wow. That would, it's almost hard to believe, but, with how many players they've lost on the defensive side of the ball, just losing Alden Smith recently as well, it's really tough to see them winning any more than 6 games. But, hey, if you've been paying attention to the San Francisco beat, Colin Kaepernick looking like Joe Montana in practice, completing every single pass. He's throwing behind the back passes. So either way, it's tough. I don't know if I could get behind Abdullah over Hyde just because Hyde does still have a lot of talent, but it's a tough situation, and maybe it's just good to steer clear, head for better situations elsewhere. And I guess maybe they may be possibly in St. Louis. That'll wrap things up for us, Kevin. But in St. Louis, we also have offensive line issues. There's a lot of concern as to whether or not this line can block for these running backs. But we have 2 running backs in play. Trey Mason, who really showed that he can get the job done at the end of the season last year. And then, of course, Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley, an ascendant talent, one of the most talented running backs to come out of college football in the last decade, putting him right up there coming out of college football with Adrian Peterson. Obviously, coming off the injury isn't ideal, but how are you approaching these guys? What are your thoughts and expectations for both Mason and Gurley?
As of right now, I don't think I'm taking either one of them. I don't really understand taking Trey Mason just because unless you're expecting Gurley to re-injure himself and go down, I don't know what you're going to be doing with him for the second half of the season. I mean, I guess it's possible that he could still be productive, but he wasn't involved in the passing game at all last year. They have Benny Cunningham, who was involved, so it's not like he's just going to take a third down sort of role and be a compliment to Gurley in that way. I think Gurley's an interesting selection. I probably would have liked him more if he was getting that the news was more negative about his injury. Maybe even if they put him on PUP, I might have liked him more because then you'd see his draft stock fall quite a bit and the opportunity cost of taking someone who's probably not going to be productive the first few games. Unfortunately, I think what's going to happen now is he's not going to be on PUP. You're going to be questioning whether or not he's going to be playing those first few weeks. He's probably not going to be very productive, but you're going to pay the price as if he was going to be in there from day one. So I think I'm going to avoid him unless the injury news gets a little bit more negative and you start sliding into those mid to late single-digit rounds. Then I could definitely see jumping on him at that point.
Yeah, Gurley has the potential to be very special, and we know that Jeff Fisher loves to feed one running back, so there is potential there, but there are causes for concern. And hey, running back's just a tough position across the board. That's why go running back early. At least get one of those top 10 guys. Try and get another player in the top 20, and or else you're going to be really kicking yourself. That zero RB is really tough to pull off this year, especially if you're not a super experienced drafter. Can't get behind that one. But that is going to do it for us. I can't believe we got through 6 teams in about 45 minutes here. But we did it, and we're going to do the AFC next week. So make sure you're following Kevin on Twitter at Cole_Kev.
Yes.
Correct? Got it. And at Mike Tagliere NFL. Follow me at Jeff Ratcliffe. Follow the show at PFF Radio, at PFF_fantasy. Listen to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, Blog Talk Radio. Watch the show on YouTube and the Fantasy Sports Network. So for Pro Football Focus, for Kevin Cole, for Mike Tagliere, for my dog Lucy, I'm Jeff, and that's a wrap.